Happy Friday, students. I'm here to give some direction about the antimicrobial lab that you're working on in STEMX. This is a really good lab to learn about the correct techniques on how to prepare bacteria cultures. This will help us later on in our genetics unit when we start genetically modifying bacteria to glow in the dark. So this is our first stab at really learning how to use agar plates and grow bacteria. Before we start, just make sure you have all the right information. You have the directions here, the antimicrobial lab directions. On Classroom, you should have the experimental design setup. You should have and this is called an agar plate. You should have a cotton swab, a sterilized cotton swab. You'll need gloves. You'll need forceps, and you'll need at least 4 disinfectants. Water is going to be our control group, and then you'll need some filter paper that are eventually you'll need to use a hole puncher to hole punch into a little circle like that. And that's going to be our little disc. Okay. So the first thing that you need to do is read the background information and fill out your experimental design sheet. So what we're really going to be testing are things called antiseptics. Antiseptics are things like mouthwash and hydrogen peroxide and alcohol and things that are supposed to prohibit bacteria from growing or combat any kind of skin disease or kill bacteria. So we're going to be testing just to see how effective some of these cleaning solutions actually are. I know they all say that they kill bacteria, but you're going to find out just how effective they are in really cleaning our skin off. Once you have, number one, determine where you're going to get your bacteria from, and that's really important. Are you going to collect your bacteria sample from your keyboard, from the doorknob, from the toilet, from the sink, from your locker? I mean, you have to pick a location and make sure that you add that to the second page of your experimental design sheet, location of the experiment. The second thing that you'll need to determine is what it is that you're going to test. And on your data table here, you have the control group, which is water, and then you'll need to pick 3 other antiseptics that you want to test. And your teachers will have all sorts of different kinds of antiseptics to test from. Once you have that label, then it's time to really think about what you think is going to happen. Make sure you come up with a hypothesis. Follow the format when writing a hypothesis, but think about what you think is going to be more effective or less effective, and then write about it. All right, that's part of the engineering process, and the scientific process is always coming up with some sort of hypothesis and plan before you get into doing any type of experiment. Once you have filled out the experimental design sheet, then you will get your agar plate, and it's important to note that the agar plate always goes upside down, and the reason why we keep it upside down is to limit the amount of moisture that could get on the agar. And what you see here, this is agar, this is nutrient agar, and this is a medium that allows bacteria to grow. So we're going to eventually put bacteria onto this agar plate, and we're going to use a method called streaking, which I'll show you how that works in a minute. But once you get your agar plate, it's important that you divide it into 4 quadrants and that you label those 4 quadrants with whatever supplies or whatever antimicrobials you're planning on testing. You see here, I've already labeled mine hydrogen peroxide, I've labeled mine water, I've labeled mine soap, just soap and water, and then I've labeled mine as bleach. So I know which quadrant I'm talking about. The other thing that you'll need to do is also, it might be helpful just to say quadrant 1, 2, 3, 4, just like that. If you can see in the screen, 1, 2, 3, and quadrant 4. That also helps you identify. Lastly, before you start collecting your data, you really need on the front side your name and what teacher you are, because we're all going to be putting these agar plates in my room in an incubator to allow the bacteria to grow, and we want to make sure that you get your correct agar plate back. So once you've done that, we'll set the agar plate down, and it's really important when you collect your data you put gloves on. Everyone's going to have access to some gloves, and we will put them on. Once you get your gloves on and you have filled out your experimental design, you come up with your hypothesis, you know what location you're testing and what antiseptics you're using, you're going to just simply rip open the cotton swab and go collect your data. You'll use water to collect the data. You'll just dip your cotton swab in water, get it nice and wet, and then you go over and you're going to just simply, whatever, let's say we're using my phone here, you're just simply going to rub whatever area that you're collecting the bacteria from and just make sure you get a good kind of sample, rotating the cotton swab back and forth, get a good sample, try and get as much stuff as you can. Right. So now that I got a good sample, I will come back to my agar dish and I'm going to take the lid off. And if you see here in the directions in procedure number 2, you have a really good direction on how to actually streak the plate. And that's what it is called scientifically. You're streaking the agar plate to get the bacteria onto the nutrient agar. And this is the direction of how you want to rub the cotton swab onto the bacteria or onto the agar plate, just to make sure that the bacteria is in fact getting onto the nutrient agar. It's really important that you're really gentle when doing this, because if you puncture the agar plate, you just ruin the agar plate and you're going to have to get a new one, and we just don't have a whole lot of additional agar plates for you to use. So please be really careful. You're just simply going to rub it, rotating that cotton swab. Okay. Kind of a snake-like motion. Get it on there. Maybe rotate it to the other side. And now I've got all this bacteria that hopefully is on the agar plate. Get a good sample. Next thing, I'm going to set this down on the ground. Right here like that. And, oops, so you can see a little bit. There we go. And the next thing, I'm going to take my disc that I have just hole punched. I'll use a hole puncher to hole punch the filter paper, and whatever antiseptic I'm using, this is just water, so this is our control. I will dip that into the water, and in the correct quadrant, I'm simply, make sure I get water. Is right here. I'm going to set that disc right in the middle. So what we're looking at is seeing if this antiseptic prohibits growth around it. And we're going to be measuring what's called a zone of inhibition. It's inhibiting bacteria growth. Some of them are going to have a large zone of inhibition, and some probably won't as much. So that's what we're going to be testing. There'll be a ring around that fluid that'll stop the bacteria from growing. So the last step is that you just simply put the lid on. You want to dump it upside down, because again, we don't want any moisture getting onto that agar plate when we put it into the incubator. And then you're going to give it to your teacher. Your teacher will then hand this to me, and we'll let the bacteria grow. And then the next time we have STEM X, you'll come back and you will actually measure the zone of inhibitions. Before you actually leave, don't forget to clean up. Take your gloves off, just like I did, like that, so we're not contaminating anything. Grab your trash and throw it in the trash can. It's perfectly okay to dispose of all this in the trash can.